I'd like to welcome you all to Scaling Agile Organizational Transformation. Implementing Agile methods within a single team is fairly straightforward, and many companies have done so successfully. However, scaling Agile to an organizational level remains challenging. Today, our presenters will discuss some of the crucial management steps in aligning the organization for agility based on their decades of experience in helping firms adopt Agile at scale. Our presenters are Sanjeev Augustine and Roland Cuellar, both with Lightspeed. Sanjeev Augustine is the president of Lightspeed and an industry-leading Agile and Lean expert. He has assisted clients in adopting Agile methods over the past decade, and he is also the author of several publications and books, including Managing Agile Projects. He's also the founder and moderator of the Yahoo Agile Project Management Discussion Group and a founder and advisory board member of APLN and a member of PMI's Agile Forum Steering Committee. Roland Cuellar is a VP at Vice President at Lightspeed. He has years of experience of Agile project management and Lean expertise. He is a leader in helping enterprise-level clients adopt the use of both Agile and Lean in their organizations and has experience preparing organizations for Agile transformation by identifying challenges and opportunities related to Agile and Lean implementation and developing action plans and risk mitigation strategies. And with that, I'll turn it over to you both.
Thanks, Leanne, and welcome everybody to this seminar. I do want to point out sort of where we're going to be focusing. As Leanne mentioned, many companies have started Agile on a team here, a team there, and maybe even a department-wide adoption. And also, an equal number of companies have had tremendous success with Agile methods at the team level. But when they try to scale Agile, let's say, a few teams or beyond a particular department, or many times beyond IT, the IT organization, the information technology organization, it seems like there are some barriers to scaling and to organizational adoption. So over the last decade or so, we've helped many companies make that successful transition, the independent successes of a team to a larger scale organizational transformation. So over the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to try to give you some thoughts. I won't say there are best practices because I don't believe that a lot of the things that would work in one company would be applicable in another company, but we've tried to distill the common patterns and we've sort of laid them all out over here. So we'll be focusing today, this is our agenda, talking about the situation, a common scenario in many companies where Agile has been successful and maybe management and teams are looking to scale it beyond one team or maybe beyond even a few teams. Roland will also be talking about the misalignment with the enterprise, where some issues with perhaps a PMO group, maybe some technical practices. What are some of the specific things that a larger scale adoption of Agile might run into when we try to scale that adoption? And then we'll be talking back and forth between Roland and myself about an organizational approach to scaling. Again, over here we're talking about scaling the Agile adoption across the enterprise. I think a lot of times people will be interested in how to take Agile and scale it to a large project or maybe to a large program. We've done a couple of webinars on that particular subject, but here we'll sort of limit our discussion to how we would, let's say in a phase one, set up the organization for an Agile adoption, move into some initial pilots in a second phase, and then move into a third phase with some expanded pilots. And beyond that, we probably won't have time to discuss that today. But there's also, I want to indicate that beyond the third phase of expanded pilots, there's a full enterprise rollout, and that can, sort of that probably will be a webinar in of itself. Roland will also give us a word on executive leadership. So for those of you out there who are in senior management or executives, we have a couple of thoughts for you, and we hope that you'll stay tuned to the end over there. And of course, we'll have time for some Q&A at the end. So with that, I want to sort of turn it over to Roland, and he's going to be talking about the situation that we see pretty commonly across the industry when teams of organizations have taken a team or two and have been very successful with Agile. Roland?
Okay, Sanjeev, thank you very much for the introduction. I want to go over sort of a common scenario, one that we see very frequently at almost all of our client sites, and that's the following. We've had Agile be successful on several individual teams or perhaps within a department. It is not uncommon for individual teams or departments who are practicing Agile to see really strong benefits. Many teams exhibiting increased productivity or time to market in the excess of 10%, quite a few getting improvements in excess of 25%. And many of our clients have reported improvements in excess of 40%, with one client recently reporting a doubling in productivity. And that's a very common sort of situation. And you look at those kind of numbers and see improvements of that magnitude, and everybody wants to go further with Agile in their organizations, I believe. I think most organizations would oftentimes be happy just getting 10% improvements in just about anything. To be able to get 25, 30, 40, or 50% improvements is astounding performance improvement. So how could we not want more of that? So there's often a feeling that we should take this Agile thing further in our organization and have more teams practice it. But here's the challenge. Almost everything that, in any organization of any size, almost everything is, if you will, aligned against us to some extent. Our how we do resource management, the kinds of metrics that we capture, how we do audit and compliance and governance, how we structure our teams, how we engage with customers, even how within IT, how our teams engage with one another, how the business analysts engage with the developers, and how the developers engage with the testers, and how all of that engages with production operations, etc., is all very much supported by, and in fact, usually enforced by the governance structures and standards and practices that we've put in place. So there's a lot of unwinding that has to be done. There's a lot of modification that has to be done to many of these systems. And it oftentimes is the case that change management really isn't one of our core competencies. We see this a lot, that people want to do this at scale, but we don't always have really large efforts that transform how we work as an organization. And so since those opportunities and those challenges don't come up very often, we're often not particularly well practiced at how to change an organization in a large scale. And so how do we get started with all of this? How do we get it going? And what is an approach that we think will work? On the next slide, I've got just more examples of some of the challenges we're going to have to deal with when we take Agile to the larger community within our enterprises. For instance, in the PMO, we often have many projects going on at the same time, and that can be supported by traditional methods, albeit delivery tends to be much slower than we'd like. It certainly can be supported. Agile does not deal with that so well. Agile would tend to lead us towards fewer number of simultaneous projects at any particular moment. And so we're going to have to adjust our PMO mechanisms, how we plan our programs, how we sequence our projects, et cetera, in order to better be able to adapt Agile. How we do resource management. In most organizations, we're trying to get everyone fully allocated, 110%. People are supporting 3 or 4 or 5 projects at a time. You can do that in a traditional environment. More difficult to do in an Agile environment. And so how we attack resource management may have to change. Real estate, something as mundane as cubes and conference rooms, is an enormous challenge in most places. Being able to get good, effective team rooms in place tends to be more difficult than we give it credit for. Agile thrives on close, tight-knit communication and collaboration, and to the extent we can get our real estate to support that, we will improve our odds for success, but it can be a challenge. In HR, how we do our performance plans, the kinds of people that we hire, the kinds of skills that we hire for, the kind of feedback that we give, et cetera, may be aligned towards our traditional methods. Our functional managers tend to really operate on local measures and local optimization and trying to maximize their component, whereas Agile is all about lean thinking and maximizing and optimizing across the whole value stream to a very different set of measures you might put in place. How we engage our business partners with requirements and their involvement in the Agile process is going to have to change. And how we deal with the whole issue of compliance and governance and audit and standards, et cetera, is certainly going to be impacted. So a lot of challenges, to be sure. And you look at this list and you think it's rather daunting to think that I'm going to have to change a lot of this. And we've got an approach for dealing with that in a better way, I think, through experience with a number of clients. And I'm going to turn it back over to Sanjeev now to talk about how we get started with this and how we go about thinking about scaling Agile. Sanjeev?
Sure. Thanks, Roland. And I think you sort of alluded to the fact that when you're faced with a huge, daunting task, the best way to do it is in sort of an imitable Agile style. Let's take a piece of this huge, daunting task, and let's move forward in a inspect and adapt kind of mode. To use the Scrum phase over there. So what we're going to talk about is an organizational approach to scaling, which is incremental in of itself. To use a PMP or sort of a PMBOK term over there, the project management body of knowledge term, it's a rolling wave adoption of Agile. And rolling wave, for those of you who might not be familiar with the traditional term, is where we have two plans, or rather, one plan at a high level, that's looking at the longer term adoption with all of our milestones, and there are more detailed plans as we move from phase to phase, and so if you think of if you have a visual metaphor of a wave over there, you can think as when, we'll come up with really detailed plans for phase one only when we do phase one. We'll come up with detailed plans for phase two only when we actually enter phase two. Similarly for phase three over here. And overall, of course, we need to plan our adoption. Planning is important, and planning is something that's indispensable that we'll do all the time. So here's our plan, if you will, for an organizational approach to scaling Agile. In our first phase, we want to identify a burning platform. I'm going to speak to that. We're going to do some education and assessment of how things are doing after that. We want to establish two accountable teams. One of these is an executive team. One of these is a grassroots, team-level team, if you will. And then we want to institute the first cut governance. I'm going to sort of jump into the phase one and leave you, we'll be covering the details of these things in detail rather than just kind of reading the slide out. So let's just jump into the phase one when we want to set up our Agile adoption. So put yourself in a situation where your organization has done a few Agile projects and had some good success. Roland talked about some of the typical metrics over there that we're seeing out in the industry, and it might turn out that a lot of you might be in the same boat, that you've actually had a lot of success with the individual Agile projects. Now you're looking to scale Agile. So the first thing we should do is to identify, what in change management terms is probably referred to as a burning platform. And again, another visual metaphor over there is that, given a choice between staying on an oil rig that is burning or jumping into the sea, we almost like to, we have to at a lot of times, when we're introducing something as daunting as an Agile adoption, we have to identify what is that business, that sort of business platform that we want to tie our Agile adoption to. Because if we don't do that, then all we'll get is, maybe some lethargy in adoption, maybe some incremental adoption, and folks are not probably going to take any bold action. So it's really important to tie Agile adoption to some clear business benefits. And then also to make sure that those business benefits are linked to the organization's strategic goals. So some examples over here with some of the companies that we've seen that we do this very successful. One of our large financial services company identified time to market, reducing time to market as their big business benefit. And then the Agile adoption was a way of achieving that business goal, reducing time to market by 50% in their case. We found in other situations where companies will say improving customer satisfaction. So they'll take some sort of a net promoter score or some sort of a standard metric and say, today we're a 4 points or a 10-point scale, and we want to raise our customer satisfaction to maybe 6 or 7 points on the 10-point scale. So it's important that we get some clear benchmarks and we tie our Agile adoption to a burning platform or a business benefit that's linked directly to our organizational strategic goals. We're going to capture 1 or 2 metrics, not too many metrics, 1 or 2 just high-level metrics. Maybe it's improving time to market or improving customer satisfaction or improving cycle time or throughput for our projects. A lot of times Agile is sort of linked to the improvements in speed. If you were to go back to the first slide there, you see some of the reasons that people are adopting Agile. And I would just sort of advise, if you're having trouble coming up with the business benefits, just do what most people are doing. A lot of times it's about reducing time to market or improving team productivity or just delivering additional business value. The major purpose over here is that we have a unifying driver, and I call it unifying because we sort of have this organizational driver across business and IT, and this is very important because sometimes whichever silo we sit, whether we're on the business side or on the IT side, we tend to sub-optimize within those silos. And what we're shooting for here is to set an organizational or an enterprise level unifying driver, a unifying metric that all different groups can work towards and move forward with. The next thing we want to do is, once we have the business platform or business burning platform identified, we want to make sure that we do some broad-based education. And we call this step educate and assess, because it's not just sort of, bring a lot of people and sort of throw out a bunch of training out there. We want to make sure what happens after we've done that. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll start with an introduction to Agile methods or some Agile team workshop, and we'll bring entire teams and together to beyond just the initial pilot teams. And we're talking about other, whole departments at a time, maybe sometimes with smaller companies, the whole company at a time. And we're going to educate a wide band of the organization on the principles and practices of Agile. And this is very important because a lot of times, when you introduce Agile to a company, people are starting to see what the practices are. They walk by a daily stand-up and they see people sort of using the Scrum terms, chicken and pig, or the XP, pair programming, PDD, all this stuff. There's a lot of jargon that we've gotten used to and we don't really realize. But when we set this foundation of Agile principles and Agile practices, we start, what we've seen is that people start to understand and they start to get that foundational capability, if you will, in what Agile methods are all about. The other thing that we need to do over here is we need to make sure that we include management in the education as well. So it's not just enough to get the teams over there. So maybe we have another workshop that targets senior managers, that targets executives, and we would probably do an orientation that says, let's get management up to speed on some of these things that are going to be coming down the pipe. Also, we might do a deep dive into some of the software development disciplines, quality assurance, business analysis, some of the PMO governance, HR, production, what have you. Once we've done this broad-based education, it's critical that we assess how this has gone. So let's, we would do a quick pulse check to ping on each one of the different groups and see how things are going. What's the level of understanding? Are there any gaps? And we'll just sort of do a quick assessment before we do any deep dive. We are sort of reserving that deep dive yet for the second phase. But this is basically to say, here's Agile, here's what Agile is, here are the principles and practices, you get some broad-based training, and we'll identify where the gaps are, and then we'll move on. Okay? So that's what we would do in the educational phase. The second thing we would do, or the third thing rather, is that we want to set up some management structures to start to introduce some governance over here. We want to set up two teams, two really accountable teams, we're saying, and they're accountable for the Agile adoption. And what are they accountable to, or what benchmark are they being held to? Well, they're being held to those metrics that we set up as the burning platform. So both the executive Agile steering group or the Agile working group, and you can choose different names. We've heard this, called a transition team or Agile community of practice. Different companies will just choose different groups. We've just sort of taken a stab at kind of naming these two groups over here. But it's important not only to set up a team and a middle management level group, that's the Agile working group towards the bottom of the slide. It's also critically important to set up an executive Agile steering group so that executives will provide the air cover and they're involved from the get-go to help drive the adoption. And then, as I mentioned, we want to make sure that these Both these teams are sort of held to that burning platform metric, but also the executive team might say, it's time to drill down. We might actually put in some additional measure for success. Maybe we want to improve retention. Maybe we want to improve associate satisfaction, not just customer satisfaction that the organization as a whole cares about, but we within our department now care about associate satisfaction, and we'll put that as a measure of success. And also, both of these groups will fulfill the need to communicate really frequently, early, and often. The last thing we want to do in the setup phase is to institute the first cut governance. Now, if you remember, we talked about this rolling wave. Now it's time. We don't want to bite off all the governance. We don't want to come in heavy and clamp down, as unfortunately is typically the case out in the industry. What we want to do is we want to build on the success of those pilots. Maybe we got a couple of Agile teams out there, and we're getting ready to do another, organizational-wide pilot process. But before we do that, we want to put in some light governance, if you will. So sometimes I call it light touch governance. We want to maintain the momentum of these an Agile team that your Agile teams might have already achieved. So we want to start small. We'll put in a few things. Maybe we'll put in some specific metrics for the teams to actually move towards. Maybe we'll say, okay, we're trying to achieve time to market. So on this particular projects, on the first wave of Agile pilot projects, we will shoot to achieve an incremental improvement in time to market by 10%, even if the organizational goal is 40% or 50%. Let's try and reduce, let's get this down and try and start small and move towards an incremental improvement. Okay, and later on we'll assess this and we'll come back and we'll put in wider governance over here. But for the first pilot phase, we want to be very careful that we don't step on or stamp out all of the improvements that the Agile teams have brought. Okay, with that I want to
turn it over. 20 minutes.
Okay, thanks, Leanne. I want to turn it over to Roland, and he's going to be talking about the second phase, moving beyond the setup where we've done the initial educate and assess, the burning platform, and the first cut governance. Roland, you want to take it from here?
Thanks, Ajit. Moving into the next phase, really getting into launching the wave of pilot projects, if we will. And that we really do mean a wave sort of metaphor. We'd like to start small and build success, gain momentum, but most importantly to learn. Sometimes firms will try to do a big bang approach to Agile where, okay, we're going to put in all the governance, we're going to put in all the standards, we're going to put in all the controls, and we're going to put in all the structures. And it takes a while to get all of that set up. And sometimes you sort of squash some of the innovation and some of the enthusiasm, and you just lose a lot of time doing that. And it's difficult to get all of that right the first time to begin with. So what we usually recommend is if you start off with these initial pilots, you see where they have problems with standards or where they have problems with governance, or where they've done outstanding jobs in those areas with a much lighter approach than you may be used to. And start to borrow from them and learn from them on what standards we should and shouldn't have, and what governance models we should and shouldn't have, and what impacts they've had with the PMO and with HR and with production operations and all those people. We take a look at those pilot projects and learn from their challenges and learn from how they've succeeded against those challenges. And we start to institute that across a broader range of projects. We set up the next level or wave of projects for success, learning from the past. So we're growing our Agile adoption. We're learning from each wave of projects, and we're going to grow, if you will, the control structures that we need. If I move to the next slide on this incremental rollout strategy, we typically, as I mentioned, like to avoid having everyone go at once. So here's the problem with having everyone go at once. You will tend to have very, very different levels of understanding of Agile in the organization. When you go all at once, you could typically start with some training, but that goes so far. People come out of training with different levels of really understanding. And they may not quite be ready for the biggest, baddest, hairiest, riskiest projects you've got. And I don't know that I would put a brand new team that's new to Agile on our biggest, riskiest projects just yet. I might want to learn how to make Agile work in our organization, how to tailor the process to fit our culture and our organization. I don't think that I've seen a standard process roll out in any good-sized company. Every company that we've worked with has had to come up with their own unique sort of blend or adoption or flavor of Agile to fit their history and their culture and their people and their technology and their architecture, etc. We want to handpick a first few wave of projects, make sure that those projects are very well supported, that they are set up for success, that they are successful, and so that we can get momentum and get quick wins and get some a wind behind our sails to push the Agile movement forward. We're going to have to do this in every wave that we're growing on our success. We're making sure our projects are successful. And at some point, we'll reach a level where we have confidence and we have experience that we can take on the bigger, larger, riskier enterprise sorts of programs that we've got to tackle. And that would be a less risky approach to eventually getting Agile to tackle those big, risky programs. Moving on to the next slide, setting these teams up for success really requires that you look at every project and determine whether you think you can be successful with Agile on that project. Do you have good product owner support? Is the business knowledgeable about their role in Agile? And are they willing to commit the time and the effort? Do we have an experienced Scrum Master or someone who can be in the room with the team to make sure that they are practicing appropriate Agile, that they are following through on the process, and that they are delivering? I think all of us probably on the line have seen Agile teams that say that they are Agile, and when you go poke a little further, you find out, well, they're not delivering working software every iteration. They don't have long-term estimates and release-level burn-down charts. There's no test-driven development. There's no testing done within the iteration. All the testing is going to happen at the end, et cetera. They don't do demos. They don't do retrospectives. All they do is daily stand-ups, and yet they call themselves Agile. We need to avoid that scenario where we turn everyone loose, let them go on their own, let them interpret the process themselves, and then have some potential project failures. By having these Scrum Masters in the room who have done this before, we can ensure success, get good practices built out, and grow a community of people who really know how to do it right, and use that to seed other future projects. Obviously, for these initial pilot projects, we're going to have strong executive support to make sure the teams get the resources that they need and get issues removed that are getting in their way. And we want them to be, impactful projects that deliver reasonable business results, so that we can build an excited community off of these early wins. And we're going to have to, so here, if we can go to the next slide. So we're on slide 17 now, assess and modify Agile governance. From these teams, we were going to learn what, as we mentioned before, learn what challenges they've had with the teams themselves, with the program management or portfolio management organization, how they've had to deal with production operations, what they did around requirements management and requirements change, how they engage their business partner, how they handle testing and traceability and test plans and other documentation. And from that, we can learn what's working in our organization and use that to build out a first level of standards and governance should you need those things. From those first projects, we make adaptations or changes to our thinking on governance structures, et cetera. And now we've got teams and people who have been successful. We've got governance and controls and standards that are sufficient to allow teams to succeed without being too heavy and too bureaucratic and taking too long to produce. And we're ready to now begin another wave of projects. And so, Sanjeev, I'll turn it back over to you to talk about extending the wave further out.
All right, thanks, Roland. So we're going to be talking about our phase 3. So we talked about phase 1, where we set up for the burning platform, do the initial round of education, and set up our initial first cut governance. Then Roland took us to phase 2, where we picked the pilot projects and started moving. And then let's assume that we're 6 months, 9 months down the line, and we've got some really good results from our pilot projects. We've got some thoughts about where things are working. We've got more people excited. We have also, along with the successes, we have some ideas where our challenges lie. And as Roland mentioned, we've assessed and adjusted our first wave of first level of governance to accommodate some of the things that are coming out. Where are the teams having trouble? Where are the roadblocks? Where are the bottlenecks? Is there only one testing environment available for multiple, 10 teams? What's the point of getting 10 teams moving faster if there's a critical bottleneck on the testing side? Or is there some issue with the PMO in terms of getting project sanctioned and moving forward? Typically what tends to happen is that once you do the first round of education, the setup and the burning platform, people are they're hyped up and psyched and ready to move forward. You get the initial pilots, as we've outlined in our phase 2, and then we start to see that things, again, there are a lot of successes, but a lot of challenges start to manifest. Ken Schwaber in the Scrum community is fond of saying that Scrum or Agile methods in general will not, they won't solve your organizational issues for you, but what they'll do is that they will expose them and make them transparent. So we generally find that you can expect that a lot of these organizational issues have made themselves visible, if you will, at this point. And so what we want to do is to launch into a third wave of pilots and extend that success and deal with some of the organizational issues at the same time. So we're going to talk about the phase 3 where we do some expanded pilots. The first thing we want to do is we start to say, well, you know what, we've maybe started with Scrum and we've started with the Agile project management, or maybe we've got a Kanban system in place. But perhaps it's time to now get serious about our technical disciplines. So one path we might take in our expanded pilot program is to say we are now going to pay careful attention to this, to the technical disciplines. We're now going to sort of lean in favor of what's known out in the industry as software craftsmanship, and we're going to build the software. Each one of our teams or each one of our organizations will have these software studios where we have really close attention and some strong discipline around things like a daily build capability, or even beyond that with continuous integration. Are we doing automated testing? What's our unit test coverage? Well, are we doing system testing? Are we doing acceptance testing? Maybe we've gotten the first steps of TDD, test-driven development, but now we need some mentoring. Maybe we need some training, some coaching, but we need to ramp up the dial, if you will, on our technical disciplines. Are we doing emergent architecture and design, pair programming? This is all the XP stuff, otherwise known as Agile engineering, that really will take us beyond an initial success or individual successes, then down into a deep dive technical discipline and really grow the capability of the organizations. We have seen, just on the business side, that the quality improves to a point that organizations will get, for example, one organization achieved a first-pass system test rate. This is the first time system testing encounters feature testing. With the waterfall process, they got a 45% first-pass system test rate, and now after delving into and getting some of these XP practices or Agile engineering practices, they were able to achieve over 90% first-pass system test rate. So there's some pretty dramatic improvements that can be had if you're serious about this, and doing not only the broad-based stuff, but also drilling down and doing the deep dive technical disciplines as well. Maybe you're in a situation where you have some outsourced projects, some distributed projects. This is the time to expand. As Roland said initially, with the pilot projects, we're going to be careful and set ourselves up for success, and limit ourselves maybe to some co-located teams and strong sponsorship and all that. But now it's time to flex our muscles. Now let's undertake some of the more complex, more challenging stuff, and maybe we'll extend Agile to our outsourced or distributed teams, and maybe move it on, try it on larger, more complex projects, like maybe a concept, a commercial off-the-shelf packaged software adoption, or maybe a large project, large program. Okay. One thing that's when we start doing this is that we definitely need to use tools to help scale. If you're working on one or two teams with co-located members, it's wonderful. You can probably get by with a single tracking board. I'm always in support of using the physical tracking board as sort of the center of gravity or the locus of interaction for a team. But we like to see Agile project management tools like a version 1 used to help scale. So to start to see this consistency of practices, to start to see that we can handle distributed teams. And it's kind of hard to think about using a single tracking board in one central location if people are scattered all across the country or maybe even all across the globe. So certainly when you're talking about scaling or Agile beyond a team of two, you should be looking at tools to help scale. And we've seen tools like version 1 be very successful in this regard. The other thing we need to do, Roland mentioned about, we talked about cube spaces, kind of touched on this very briefly. A lot of folks in the corporate world might be, sort of stacked up in cubes, and I love the word when they say stacking, and then we'll do a restacking. I don't know if you've heard that, but I've heard that corporates speak quite a bit. Well, we need to restack our facilities. Well, if a restacking of facilities is coming up, why not do something like Capital One did? Capital One, large adopter of Agile out in Richmond, Virginia, and you see here this is from their design company. Capital One decided that they would do sort of a facilities redesign, not just for their Agile teams, but for all of their teams, and where they would create collaborative workspaces. So there are things like the team neighborhood, some lounge space where people could decompress, the project rooms, of course, where people are co-located, storage and filing cabinets, some quiet zones where people can go and do their quiet work outside of the hubbub of the daily sort of daily grind, if you will. So you see there, on the right-hand side, some coffee lounges where people can decompress, be quiet, just do sort of creative work, and then also the collaborative team rooms where people come together and they'll collaborate. Now, Alistair Coburn has this term called caves and commons. And every organization, every Agile team should have some common space where they can come together and work. But we also need to make sure that we don't forget the needs of our team members, and that we understand that they're going to need some downtime, some time off, maybe some personal time. So they're going to need some cave space, if you will, some private space. And if you're scaling Agile across the enterprise, then this is something that you should definitely get HR facilities involved with early. You see down at the bottom in the gray left-hand side that some statistics around just financial benefits. So normally you get 300 to 400 people on a floor. I'm sorry, normally it's about 170 people with cubes, and by doing this collaborative design, not only do we get the benefit of setting up a workspace where people can be highly productive and collaborative and also do the private stuff, but guess what? There's a financial benefit as well, where now we're able to get 300 to 400 people housed on a space that was 170 or so. Now, this is, I think, a tremendous argument or sort of a tremendous fact to take up to senior management and say, hey, when we redesign these Agile workspaces, not only is it good for the team, but it's good for the CFO as well, if you will. We also want to talk about, keeping room for other methodologies. So we're certainly Agile enthusiasts, and we've certainly been doing, we've been doing Agile for, right now it's over 10 years. So it's our personal passion and professional, profession to help with Agile. But we also understand that it's not all or nothing, right? So if you're in a larger organization, different people have different styles. So it's really important not to force fit Agile or ram Agile down the throats of everybody in the company. There are, we have to recognize that there are some folks who really just don't like working this way. Now, is that a problem? Not only if we make it so, right? So I think if you recognize that different people have different working styles, we have to understand that, or we have to accommodate those working styles. For example, somebody, you might have a developer who's very, very productive, brilliant developer, but just prefers to work in private. You don't want to, sort of force fit that person and make them miserable by putting them on an Agile team. where they don't want to interact, or you might have a manager who's more comfortable with a command and control kind of style. They're effective. They got their little sphere of influence and their productive space. We should make sure that we can accommodate multiple methodologies. So all of these successful enterprise Agile adoptions that we've seen take that reality into consideration, and what they do is they set up some sort of a project type analysis, and then depending on the considerations, like is it critical, non-critical, is it maintenance versus development, is it packaged software versus saying what's the level of executive support, we might maintain a waterfall cycle, we might have an Agile cycle and maybe some maintenance process, but we shouldn't try to sort of use this to employ the old adage, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So we want to make sure that we keep and we are wise, if you will, or intentional in our and mindful in our adoption of Agile, and understanding that not everybody will love Agile and go to it just because we love it. I'm going to turn it over at that point. I think we've covered phase 1 setup, phase 2 the initial pilots, phase 2 the expanded pilots. We're not going to have time today to talk about enterprise rollout. Maybe that will be the subject of a future webinar. So I'm going to turn it over to Roland over here, and he's going to have this last say or the final word for our executives out there. And for the rest of us, I think we can encourage our executives. We know they have a hard job. And Roland, you want to just give us some pointers on executive leadership of Agile adoptions?
Absolutely. So slide 24, leading effective change. I would say that companies that have been successful on the whole with Agile on a broad enterprise scale have been very good at leading organizational change, and the companies that have been less successful with Agile on a broad scale have been those where change management maybe was not their particular strength or strong point. I think you're more likely to fail because of this list than any issues related to architecture or technology or any of that kind of thing. A recent article in the Harvard Business Review called Why Change Efforts Fail did sort of a David Letterman, top 10, in this case top 8 list of reasons that change efforts tend to fail. Insufficient sense of urgency. This ties back to our burning platform. Do we have a burning platform? What is the reason that we're doing this, and why is it important? And if you can't communicate that very clearly, it's going to be difficult getting people on board. Ineffective coalition. The executive team not able to build a strong enough group of managers to help push the effort forward. We tried to address that with our 2 accountable teams. One of those was an effective senior leadership team who was accountable for pushing this thing forward. Lacking a vision, that kind of ties back to number 1 in the sense of urgency. What are we doing and why are we doing it, and how is this going to help? Number 4 is huge, under-communicating by a factor of 10. If you are leading a transformation effort, you're going to have to communicate the how and the why and the when and the where and the what over and over and over again, potentially for several years, before it will really begin to stick. Removing obstacles to adoption, not planning for and getting short-term wins. We talked about this. We want to use this rolling wave pilot project approach to get those short-term wins and get some momentum. Declaring victory too soon, you should probably plan on a couple of years to move your organization from non-Agile to Agile. And not anchoring the change in the company's culture. If you have a culture that is very top-down, command and control, you might use one set of messaging and communications and methods for instituting Agile. And if you have a company that is very rooted in consensus, collaborative sort of culture, you might have to use a different message, a different approach, a different way of getting those people on board. So you have to think about your culture and how you roll this out in a way that actually leverages the culture as opposed to fights against it. I'm going to wrap it up now very quickly, and then we're going to go to Q&A. Brief summary. What we've really been talking about, in a sense, is using Agile to implement Agile, taking this rolling wave, iterative approach to scaling, doing waves of projects, adopting and adapting practices and governance and standards and controls as you need them, based upon the outputs and the successes and challenges of those projects, and continuing to roll this out in a very incremental kind of way. We've talked about really not leaving any department behind. That we need to get on board very early, right from the get-go, with HR and the PMO and production and resource managers and functional managers. We not have all the problems solved or even known just yet, but we've got to get them on board to build that broad coalition of support and then agree that we're going to discover the challenges and try to fix them as they happen so that we get this, we can get momentum and get going. If we try to boil the ocean and do all of this stuff at once before we ever start our first projects, it could be a very long time before we get going. We're going to adapt to the problems at hand and roll that solution out repeatedly. And we've seen this method work at a number of organizations. The actual flavor that it takes on in your organization is going to be dependent upon your culture and your history and your background, where you are with Agile. But we definitely propose an incremental approach. And so with that, I think we're going to wrap it up now and turn it back over to Leanne to close us out.
All right, well, we've got several questions, and again, I encourage everyone to continue to ask them as we go along. But the first one we have is Agile appropriate for projects that are not software development intensive, i.e. business process improvements, infrastructure, implementations of other sorts? And if so, is the model that you proposed suitable for these types of projects?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, it's kind of ironic, Leanne, that you're asking the question, because right before this webinar, we were having a discussion with you about how you're using Agile for marketing. Mm-hmm. And so, we've seen Agile certainly being used, just the principles and the practices, maybe not the software development practices, but the project management practices, like the release planning, the sprint planning, the iterations, the sprints, all that being used in a number of non-software areas. Jeff Sutherland, the co-creator of Scrum, his wife, Arlene Sutherland, is a minister, and she's got a bunch of case studies about how churches are using Scrum to run their churches. We've seen a bunch of other non-profit areas and also for-profit areas use Agile for the commercial side, maybe for operations, maybe for HR, for marketing. I'm going to let Roland tell his story about the legal team at one of the companies that he encountered. Roland, you want to talk about that legal team who was doing Agile?
Yeah, I was at a big client of ours one time who was adopting Agile, and I walked by a room that was obviously an Agile Scrum room. It had all the markings of burned-down charts and little stickies up on the wall and people sitting in the room. And I thought I would walk inside and introduce myself, because I thought I knew of all the Agile teams that were going on at this firm, and I didn't recognize all these guys, and also they were all wearing suits. So I walk in, I introduce myself, I say, hi, I'm Roland, and we're here helping with the Agile adoption, and I don't recognize you guys. Who are you? And they said, oh, we're all lawyers and we're from legal, but we've been watching how IT has been adapting to constantly changing requirements, dealing with communication and collaboration, all getting on the same page, planning their projects for short-term delivery, and we've decided that we can use that in managing our caseloads and the state filings that we need to do and the lawsuit of the day that needs to be responded to. We have constantly changing priorities, and our long-term plans don't last a day, and we think we can use Scrum to help us. So that's one example. We've got another client right now who's using it in their help desk with constantly incoming changes in terms of help desk requests and tickets, and they have to constantly reprioritize. And so they're using it as well. So we've seen it work in a number of different functions. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to sort of wrap up that question, the answer to the question, and make sure that the answer to the second part of the question is, would you recommend this approach? Absolutely, because if you think about it, this approach is about organizational change, and introducing Agile and rolling it out to a larger, wider audience is an organizational change initiative. So what we've laid out here is, even though it's kind of rooted in Agile, it's an approach to large-scale organizational change. Next question. Yeah.
Excellent. So the next question we have is, what project reporting information should we be providing to the governance or senior management of the enterprise?
Can you repeat that one more time, Liam? I just want to make sure I understand it.
Which project reporting information, status reports, what type of information should they be kind of pushing up to senior management?
Yeah, we've worked with a number of clients to help them design the appropriate reporting mechanisms. And one thing that frequently comes up is the project dashboard. A project dashboard in an Agile world is going to look very different from your project dashboard on a traditional project. On a traditional project, it's going to say, that we're 80% through with the design phase, and we've had these many change control requests approved, and all that sort of thing. And you have a picture of a Gantt chart and all that sort of thing. When we're designing for Agile teams, their project dashboards, we tend to have the release burn-down charts as being maybe the number one indicator of overall long-term team performance towards any sort of scheduled plan. What are the change requests that have come in? What are the features that have been delivered to date? What are the features that are going to be delivered next? What are the blocks, impediments to success that the team is struggling with? And so we tend to focus on that sort of thing. Long-term release planning, where are we? What have we delivered so far in terms of functionality? What's to be delivered next? What's getting in our way? There are others you could get into. Velocity stability would be one. Is our velocity stable from one iteration to the next, or is it all over the place? Because that's going to give us a gauge as to whether that long-term schedule is going to hold or not. So that would be a handful of things that one would report at a project level up across a number of projects up to the portfolio level. They can look at all of these projects and get a similar picture of team performance.
Just one word of caution over there with the velocity, just to clarify that. One thing we would strongly caution against is to try to normalize velocity across multiple teams. The Agile velocity is a team kind of centric, team dependent metric, and executives shouldn't be looking at 5 teams and saying, well, why is this team doing 5 points per sprint versus the other team that's doing 25 points per sprint? That's not a good way to measure it. So if you're looking for a metric that crosses multiple teams, use velocity.
Yeah, I would look for standard deviation in the change in velocity might be what I would look for. Do we have stable velocity, or is it growing slowly over time, meaning that the team is getting faster and better? Or is the velocity all over the place, meaning that there is something that's causing instability that we need to look further into?
Next question.
Thank you. The next question we have, again, is around senior management. It's what are the top things you would share with senior management to help convince them to go Agile?
To help convince them to go Agile?
Mm-hmm.
So so certainly, it depends where your adoption is starting. If you could start with a bottom-up, grassroots kind of adoption of Agile, and I'm assuming that's where the question is coming from. There are an increasing number of organizations that are actually starting with the executive level. So the answer is kind of different in both cases. So let me address the first one. If you're starting with a grassroots adoption of Agile and you're trying to get your C-level executives on board, a lot of we're many years into the Agile cycle now, and it's a sort of a mainstream, almost mainstream, if not a completely mainstream process at this point. So what you have is what you can bring to bear on executives is peer pressure. And you can go to CIO magazine. You can scour Google, and certainly folks at Version 1, other executive roundtables. We can get a whole bunch of executives who've actually talked about their experience. And a lot of times you can executives tend to give a lot of credence to the experience, to the insights, and to the advice of their peers. So the number one thing I would advise is that find yourself some other folks outside, other executives outside of your own company, and whether it's case studies on the web or podcasts, or even if you know some of these executives have done Agile, see if you can sort of use that as peer pressure on your own executives. That's one thing. The other thing to sort of help convince executives is to show them demonstrable business value. Assuming that you've done a couple of Agile projects and you've had success, what you should have is somebody at this point, somebody from your business side, your business partner, some product owner, maybe some senior business managers, and they can be tremendous sort of drivers or tremendous evangelists and helpers in convincing executives to move forward. So partners on the business side, demonstrable business value from the projects, and peer pressure from other executives in the industry is probably my top 3 list. Rowan, any others to add to that?
I would echo echo both of those statements. I think that finding internal business partners can be a huge success. If you're talking about IT executives and IT managers, getting them to move over to Agile, it can be difficult if they're not sold. They've got a lot of history and success with the status quo, and they know how it works, and they've gotten to certain positions in the organization by making that current process work. So we have to wrestle them away from what they're comfortable with, which can be difficult. I think your best ally in that case is a very satisfied product owner, someone on the business side that IT is accountable to, and having your product owners who have been very successful with you go up to the IT management and say, this process is fantastic, and this is how we want to develop products, and I want IT to do more of this. It can be a very powerful message.
All right, the next question we have.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's another thing that is very powerful is to actually make it real. By this I mean, if you've got a team room set up and you've actually got an Agile team underway over there, it's really fantastic to be able to bring your executives down and say, just hang out in the team room, see what these teams are doing. And they can almost sort of learn by osmosis at that point. But seeing a team in operation makes it real, and it takes it out of sort of the theoretical realm of white papers and case studies. And when they see these, if you remember the old HP adage of management by walking around, if an executive is willing to learn and come down and say, I'm going to take a look at this Agile team that seems to be doing great stuff, it's amazing the kind of mindset shifts that can happen.
Excellent. The next question we have is, will organizations realize the benefits of Agile if the entire organization does not eventually adopt Agile? It seems to me the benefits will be diluted if IT completes projects in blinding speed, but the deliverables sit on the shelf because the organization isn't ready to deploy them.
Yeah, we do need to. I think there's two answers to that. One is that I haven't seen any large company that has adopted Agile absolutely everywhere for every project and in every organization. Even in the biggest companies, we tend to have 2 or 3 processes going on at one time. And there's the old waterfall process, and there's a RUP process that's going on that people were using 10 years ago. And then there's the Agile thing taking off. And so they often have to support multiple methodologies. I think the key to making this work is that every organization has a way to handle the 2 or 3 methodologies. And if you've got one particular part of your organization that only wants to work in a waterfall way or a traditional way and is stonewalling or roadblocking you from getting your hard-won features into production, then that tells me we have a misalignment in terms of our metrics and how we're measuring, and we don't have a cross-cutting metric that is going to force them to play by the same rules that you guys are trying to play to. So that would be my first thought on that, and I'm sure you've had some additional ones.
Yeah, and I think what we've laid out here is some thoughts on sort of employ another adage is boiling the ocean. We're trying to make the entire organization move to Agile. We want to caveat that, as we said, that you've got to keep the room for some of the other methodologies. And the other thing I would say is that there are hundreds of, maybe even thousands of companies that have achieved success with Agile in different pockets of the organization. And that's quite okay, and I think that's valuable. And a certain extent, if you have to sort of make this judgment call: will your company move to an organizational adoption? Is it something that you support? Is it something that executive management wants? And if not, well, all is not lost. There's tremendous value to be had to have one project, maybe several projects, maybe several departments go to Agile. So I think the vast majority of companies out there are not the ones that have complete enterprise-wide transformations. Certainly at the large company level, I personally know of about 10 that have done enterprise-wide transformations, and I'm accommodating the waterfall processes or the other iterative processes. But many but many companies, especially the large ones, tend to have had tremendous success department-wide. Maybe one particular business unit teams up with IT and dramatically improves their time to market, their customer satisfaction, and I think that's fine as well. So we shouldn't set ourselves an impossible goal.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time that we have right now. There's still several questions, and I think I can commit Sanjeev and Roland to follow up with those offline. But I want to thank you both for the presentation today. I think it was excellent. And any other final words?
Sure. I mean, so if you want to learn more, you can go to our blog, actually our website, Lightspeed, LITHESPEED.com. You see it over there, and you can go to our blog, our resources page, and see some more about the work that we're doing. Also, if you happen to be, we tend to do training pretty much across the country, sometimes internationally. So if you happen to, want to contact us and meet in person, we're happy to do that as well, and maybe have get together or lunch or whatever, and answer any other questions that you might have. So feel free to check out our blog, our website, our white papers, our books, what have you. We put a lot of stuff out there, and we'd love for you to consume it and be part of our larger community with our friends at Version 1 and the rest of you out there.